There is a moment in this story, and I need you to stay with me until we get there, where a man watches a video on a phone. It is less than 4 minutes long. And in those 4 minutes, everything he thought he knew about his own life, his success, his strength, the empire he built, the story he told himself about who he was, all of it comes apart. Not because of what someone did to him. Because of what someone did for him. In a kitchen. At 3 in the morning. When nobody else was there. When he was the most broken he had ever been in his life. And the only person who stayed, the only person who sat with him in that darkness and refused to let him disappear into it, was a woman whose name his new fiancée could not even be bothered to pronounce correctly. Her name was Amora. And they called her the Help. The Johnson compound in Lekki sat at the kind of address that announced itself without trying, the way serious money in Lagos always does. Not the loud, glass and chrome money that puts its name on billboards. The settled kind. Stone walls. Bougainvillea climbing the gates. A driveway that curved so the house revealed itself slowly, as though it understood the value of an entrance. Emeka Johnson had built it with the specific, grinding force of all that turns a young man with one good suit and a borrowed briefcase into the kind of person who owns compounds in Lekki. His construction and real estate business had grown from a single contract into a portfolio that spanned 14 states. He was the kind of man Lagos produces and then celebrates, self-made, proud, relentless, and constitutionally unable to sit still. He wore his success the way certain men wear expensive watches, not to show others but because he had genuinely forgotten what his wrist felt like without it. He had 2 children. Lara was his eldest. Sharp, focused, already becoming exactly the woman she had decided to become before anyone else had figured out she'd made the decision. She had her father's jaw and something entirely her own in the way she moved through rooms, like someone who had already calculated every exit and found them all satisfactory. Bright was his youngest. Softer than his sister in every way that mattered and harder in the ways nobody could see yet. He felt everything at full volume. He kept a journal. He was the kind of boy who would stop in the middle of his own grief to ask if you were okay. He had been terrified of his father's disappointment for as long as he could remember and had spent most of his adolescence trying, unsuccessfully, to become someone his father could read easily. Their mother had died when they were still young. Cancer. A long fight and then a Tuesday morning that neither child has ever described to anyone in complete sentences. After she died, the compound needed someone. Not a replacement, nobody was stupid enough to use that word. But a steadiness. A presence that could hold the daily architecture of a household together while a grieving man buried himself in work and 2 children learned to navigate loss without a map. The agency sent Amora. Amora Okafor arrived at the Johnson compound on a Monday morning with a single reference letter, a cloth bag, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have already been through the thing that was supposed to break them, and discovered, on the other side of it, that they were still standing. She had been a different person before. She did not advertise this. It was not a secret exactly. It was more like a life she had folded carefully away, the way you fold something when you are not ready to look at it directly but are not ready to let it go either. She had studied law. She had been good at it, not just technically good but constitutionally suited to it. The kind of person who can hold complexity in their mind without flinching, follow a thread of logic through tangled human situations and find where it leads. Her professor had told her in her final year that she had one of the sharpest analytical minds he had encountered in 2 decades of teaching. She had received this without false modesty. She already knew it. She was glad someone else had finally noticed. She had passed her bar exams. She had been 3 weeks from starting her first position at a respected firm when her younger brother Daniel was arrested. Daniel was the gentlest person she had ever known. He worked as a clerk for a construction company. He was accused of diverting company funds. The evidence was thin, contradictory, and unsupported by the 3 witnesses whose testimonies were never properly heard. The lawyer assigned to him was overworked and underprepared. The system moved the way it sometimes moves when a young man without resources finds himself inside it, quickly, and without mercy. Daniel was convicted. He served less than 2 years before a respiratory condition and inadequate medical care turned a cough into a crisis and a crisis into a phone call that Amora received on a Wednesday afternoon while sitting at her desk at the firm she had just joined. She sat at that desk for a long time after the call ended. Then she stood up. She walked out. She did not go back. She could not be part of a system that had swallowed her brother whole. Could not sit in its offices, wear its suits, speak its language and pretend it was something it had proven, in the most personal and devastating way available, that it was not. The grief was too close to the thing she had spent her whole life building toward. She could not separate them. So she had walked away from law the way you walk away from a fire. Because staying would have consumed her. She found her way to domestic work through necessity and through something she did not fully understand at the time, the instinct of a person who needs, after catastrophic loss, to be useful in a way that is immediate and human and cannot be bureaucratized. She needed to be in a house. She needed to care for people directly. She needed the uncomplicated honesty of a child's lunch made well, a home kept with integrity, a family held together by daily attention. She needed, though she would not have used this word then, to heal. The Johnson compound gave her the space to do it. When she arrived, Emeka Johnson shook her hand briefly without meeting her eyes. He was on a call, as he would be almost every time she saw him in those first months. Lara assessed her from the staircase with the frank evaluation of a young woman who has decided she does not need to perform warmth for domestic staff. She said, "We had someone before. She lasted 8 months. The one before that lasted 4. She let this land. Then she went back upstairs." Bright was in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the sofa, reading. He looked up when Amora walked in. He looked at her with the open, unguarded attention of a child who has not yet learned to be careful about showing people they have his full focus. He said, "Are you going to leave?" Amora looked at him for a moment. She said, "Not if I can help it." He went back to his book. But something in his shoulders changed. Relaxed, the way a child relaxes when they have been holding a breath for a very long time and have decided, provisionally, to let it go. She stayed. She stayed through Lara's university years and her time abroad and her return to Lagos as a woman who had seen enough of the world to know exactly where she wanted to be in it. Through Bright's difficult adolescence, his journals, his slow and painful discovery that he was not his father, and that this was not a failure. Through Emeka Johnson's expansions, his acquisitions, the long stretches of work that kept him absent from his own house more days than he occupied it. She became the gravitational center of that household. Not through authority. Not through assertion. But through the patient, daily accumulation of being the person who knew. She knew that Bright took his tea without sugar but with milk heated separately. She knew that Lara's anxiety about flying was worse when she was tired and needed distraction rather than reassurance. She knew that Emeka Johnson's migraines always announced themselves with a particular quality of silence before they became visible, and that if she placed his medication on his desk without comment at precisely that moment, he would take it without having to admit he needed it. She knew all of them. She knew them in the deep, structural way that comes from years of paying the kind of attention most people reserve for the things they consider important, and she had decided, from the first Monday morning, that these people were important. That this work was important. That doing it properly, every single day, regardless of whether it was acknowledged, was the only way she knew how to do anything. She had given this family 20 years. 20 years of early mornings and late evenings. 20 years of held confidences and smoothed conflicts and meals prepared and crises managed and children guided through the dark passages of growing up without a mother. 20 years of being the one constant in a house where everything else changed. And she had asked for nothing. That was not entirely true. She had asked for one thing. Not out loud. Not in words that anyone could have heard or refused. She had asked, in the quiet of herself, simply to be seen. To be treated as a person who existed in full, not just in the function she performed, not just in the role she occupied, but as a human being with a history and an interior life and a dignity that did not depend on anyone else's acknowledgement to be real. For 20 years, in the Johnson compound, that request had largely gone unanswered. She had absorbed it. She had absorbed it the way she had always absorbed difficult things, steadily, without visible diminishment, filing it in the place she kept the things that were done to her that she had chosen not to spend energy on. Because energy is a resource. And she had learned, in the years before the Johnson compound and the years within it, that spending energy on things you cannot change is the specific kind of waste that costs you the most over time. But she had never stopped asking. The compound had a kitchen that faced the back garden. Large, practical, tiled in cream. At 3 in the morning it was the quietest room in the house, the only room where the silence felt spacious rather than empty. Amora was in that kitchen on the night everything nearly ended. Not her story. His. It was during the worst period of Emeka Johnson's professional life. A period he has never discussed publicly and would not discuss privately, not then, not after. A collapse. 2 major contracts falling apart simultaneously. A bank calling in a loan that his cash flow could not absorb. Partners who had been loyal for years suddenly reassessing their loyalty now that the numbers were difficult. He had been building for so long in one direction that he had not, until this moment, genuinely considered what it would feel like if the building stopped. It felt like this. Like sitting alone in a large house at 3 in the morning at a kitchen table with a glass in front of him that he kept refilling and a phone in his hand that he could not bring himself to turn off because the silence of a switched-off phone was worse than the notifications. Amara had heard him from her room. Not his voice, he was not speaking. The particular sound of a man who is not sleeping but is trying to stay quiet about it. The creak of the kitchen chair. The clink of glass on tile. She had got up. She had not asked herself whether to. She had simply got up and gone to the kitchen because someone was in the kitchen at 3 in the morning and that was not a situation she could remain in her room about. He looked up when she entered. He was not embarrassed, he was too far past the stage of managing his appearance to be embarrassed. He was the specific version of a person who has stopped performing because the performance has become an energy they no longer have. He looked at her with the flat, exhausted openness of a man who has nothing left to hide behind. She did not ask if he was okay. She could see he was not okay. She did not offer platitudes or the practiced comforts of someone who has rehearsed what to say in difficult moments. She went to the kettle. She made tea. She set a cup in front of him and sat down across the table and said nothing. He looked at the tea. He said, "You should go back to bed." She said, "I'm not tired." This was not true. But it was kind. He was quiet for a long time. She waited with the patience of someone who understands that silence, offered correctly, is its own form of company. He started talking. Not about the business, not at first. About his father. About a specific memory of his father sitting at a table very like this one in a house that was nothing like this one, in the exact same posture, glass in hand, eyes nowhere in particular, the look of a man inside a difficulty too large to describe. He had watched his father from the doorway as a child and had sworn to himself that he would build something so solid nothing could put him in that posture. He said, "I am sitting exactly where he sat today." Amara said nothing. She let him hear himself. He talked for a long time. About the contracts. About the partners. About the specific terror of a man who has built his identity around forward motion encountering the first thing in his life that will not move forward regardless of how hard he pushes it. He talked until the glass was empty and the tea was cold and the kitchen had the grey pre-dawn quality of a room that has been sat in through the whole night. At some point in the middle of it, she could not have said exactly when, she had reached for her phone. Not to make a call. Not consciously to do anything in particular. She had simply picked it up from the table where she'd set it when she sat down and she had opened the camera and she had begun, very quietly, to record. She did not know why she was doing it. She would ask herself this question many times afterward. The most honest answer she ever arrived at was this: she was afraid. Not of him. For him. She had watched a man arrive at a place in himself that frightened her in the specific way that certain silences frighten people who have learned to recognize what serious despair sounds like when it stops making noise. She thought that if he could not remember this moment clearly, if the morning came and the difficulty was still there and he had only the blurred evidence of a night he had tried to drink his way through, she wanted him to have something. She wanted him to have the record of himself surviving it. That was all. She would never use it. She would never show him. She would carry it on every phone she owned for the rest of her time in that house, backed up and unmentioned, a private insurance against the possibility of a man forgetting that he had once sat at a kitchen table at 3 in the morning and talked himself back from the edge of something. Toward the end of the night, when the talking had subsided into the quieter, cleaner territory that serious conversations sometimes reach when everything necessary has been said, she had asked him to do something. She had asked him to write down every reason he had to keep going. He had looked at her. She had pushed a notepad across the table. A household notepad, the kind used for grocery lists. She had put a pen beside it. She said, "Write them down, sir. Every reason. I am not leaving this kitchen until you do." He had looked at the notepad for a long moment. Then he had picked up the pen. He wrote Lara first. Then Bright. Then his mother's name. Then 3 things he still wanted to build, not financial targets, but actual things. A school in his father's village. A foundation for young contractors who needed their first chance. A conversation with his son that he had been postponing for too long. He wrote until the page was full. He had not noticed her phone on the table. She had set it face down after a while, recording the ceiling, picking up his voice and her voice and the scratch of the pen on paper and the sound of the compound at night. When he was done she had taken the notepad and folded it and placed it under his hand. She had said, "That is what is waiting for you on the other side of this. None of that goes away because tonight is hard." He had said nothing. But something in his face had shifted. The specific shift of a person who has been reminded of something they knew and had temporarily lost access to. She had washed the cups. She had turned off the kitchen light. She had gone back to her room. She had never spoken of that night again. Neither had he. In the months that followed, the crisis passed, not cleanly, not without cost, but it passed. The business restructured. New contracts came. The forward motion resumed. And Emeka Johnson, being Emeka Johnson, moved back into the full speed of his life without looking back, the way people move away from the edges of difficult things when the path forward reopens. He did not remember the night the way she remembered it. Or perhaps he remembered it but had filed it in the place where people file the versions of themselves they are not comfortable inhabiting in full daylight. Amara did not hold this against him. She simply held the video. Her name was Vanessa. She arrived in Emeka Johnson's life the way certain people arrive, with the absolute confidence of someone who has decided the space already belongs to them and is simply in the process of moving in. She was polished in the deliberate, high-maintenance way of a woman who treats her appearance as an investment portfolio, carefully managed, regularly reviewed, expected to produce returns. She was intelligent. She was strategic. And she had, within 6 weeks of meeting Emeka Johnson, understood the landscape of his life with the clear-eyed efficiency of someone assessing a property before making an offer. The compound was part of the landscape. Amara was part of the compound. And Vanessa, from their very first meeting, had identified Amara with the specific precision of a woman who knows the difference between furniture and a competing force, and had made her determination accordingly. She began carefully. Not with open hostility, that would have been too visible, too easily named. She began with the small, deniable instruments of a woman who understands that the most effective way to remove something is to make it seem like a problem rather than a target. A remark about the way the kitchen was organized, not a complaint exactly, just a wondering aloud, performed in Emeka's presence, about whether things might be more efficient differently. A comment about a meal that was not quite to her preference. The particular, theatrical thoughtfulness of a woman who is managing a difficult situation with admirable patience, the situation being Amara, though Amara's name was not always used. She used, instead, a phrase that she deployed with the consistency of someone who has found a tool that works and sees no reason to replace it. She called her your girl. Your girl forgot to pick up my dry cleaning. Your girl prepared the wrong thing again. I know your girl means well, but... Amara heard every iteration of this. She absorbed it with the same steadiness she had applied to 20 years of the compound's various demands. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She continued her work with the methodical and showy integrity that had always been her standard, not because she was performing patience, but because her quality of work was hers and she was not going to allow Vanessa's campaign to contaminate the one thing in that house that was fully in her own hands. But she watched. She had always watched. Lara was abroad when Vanessa arrived and returned to find the compound changed in the specific, hard-to-articulate way that a family home changes when a new person's gravity begins to reorganize it. She did not like what she found. She was not subtle about this. She and Vanessa circled each other with the careful, contained hostility of two people who have correctly identified each other as obstacles and have decided, for the moment, to be civilized about it. Bright was home. Bright saw everything, felt everything, said almost nothing, which was his way. He watched Vanessa the way he watched all things that made him uneasy, with the careful attention of someone cataloging evidence they are not yet sure what to do with. He watched the way she spoke to Amara. He watched the way his father did not notice or did not respond when he noticed. He said nothing because saying something to his father about Vanessa felt like walking into a room whose floor he was not certain would hold him. He went to Amara's kitchen instead. He always had. He would sit on the stool at the kitchen counter the way he had sat on it since he was a child, and she would make him something, tea, or chin-chin, or the specific pepper soup she had made for him every time he was sick and which he now sought out when he was not sick but simply needed the thing the soup represented, and they would talk. Not always about the thing that was actually wrong. Sometimes about other things. But she was always there and he always came and the kitchen was always the place where the compound's actual life happened, underneath the performance of the formal rooms, underneath the surface the household presented to the world. It was Vanessa who changed this. It was not a single moment. It was a campaign, patient, deliberate, incremental. Each week something shifted. Each week the territory available to Amara contracted slightly. The kitchen reorganized in a way that displaced her established systems. A schedule altered without consultation. A reference to the way things will run going forward dropped into a dinner conversation like a stone into still water, creating ripples that were felt by everyone in the room. And then there was the matter of the accusation. It began with a bracelet. Vanessa's bracelet, A thin gold thing she wore on her left wrist and touched periodically with her right hand in the gesture of a woman who is aware that an expensive thing is there and wants to remain aware of it. It went missing on a Thursday. By Friday morning it had not been found. By Friday afternoon, Vanessa had introduced the subject into a conversation with Emeka with the careful, pained reluctance of a woman who hates to raise it but feels she has no choice. She did not accuse Amara directly. She never accused Amara directly. She simply noted that she had searched everywhere. That the only people who had been in the room were herself and the staff. That she was not saying anything, she just didn't know what else to think. Emeka called Amara to his study. She came and stood before him in the posture she had always had in this house, upright, present, composed. He asked her about the bracelet. She told him she had not seen it, had not touched it, had no knowledge of it. He looked at her for a long moment. She could see, behind his eyes, the specific internal negotiation of a man caught between two women and performing the calculation that men in this position perform, weighing 20 years of demonstrated loyalty against 6 months of a new relationship's pressure and finding, to his discredit, that the calculation was closer than it should have been. He said he believed her. But the way he said it contained the specific qualification of a man who is not entirely sure that he does. The bracelet was found the following week in the pocket of a jacket Vanessa had worn to the event where she had first noticed it missing. She said nothing about the finding. She moved on. No apology was offered to Amara. No acknowledgement was made that the unspoken accusation had been wrong. Amara returned to work. But something had changed. Not in her, she was still herself, still present, still applying the same standard to her work that she had always applied. Something had changed in the compound's emotional atmosphere. The accusation, though never fully voiced, had introduced a question into the air. And questions of that kind, once introduced, have a way of altering the atmosphere even after the specific incident that introduced them has been resolved. Vanessa understood this. She had planned on it. The incidents that followed were small. A household account discrepancy that turned out to be a recording error but spent 4 days being discussed as something possibly worse. A comment from Vanessa to a visitor, made within Amara's hearing, which was not an accident, about the difficulty of maintaining standards when staff had been in a household too long, had become too comfortable, had started to confuse familiarity with entitlement. Amara heard this and set down the tray she was carrying and stood for a moment in the corridor and breathed. Then she picked up the tray and continued. She had been doing this for 20 years. She would continue doing it for as long as the compound needed her. She was not going to be moved by a woman who had arrived 6 months ago and had decided, with the specific arrogance of someone who has never had to earn a thing slowly, that she could dismantle in 6 months what had been built in 2 decades. But she had not accounted for the engagement. Emeka announced it at a Sunday dinner, Lara home from abroad, bright at the table, Vanessa at his right hand with the composed satisfaction of a woman who has arrived at the destination she intended to reach. He spoke about it the way he spoke about successful contracts, with pride and momentum and the certainty of a man announcing something that is already decided and is informing rather than consulting. Lara's face did what it did. She was good at controlling it and she controlled it. She said the right things. Bright said very little, which was noticed. Amara served the meal and cleared the plates and moved through the evening with the full, careful attention she brought to everything. She congratulated Mr. Johnson quietly in the kitchen when the meal was done. She meant it in the way that it is possible to wish someone well while also being afraid of what their happiness is about to cost you. She was right to be afraid. The dinner party was Vanessa's production. 40 guests. The formal dining room opened onto the garden for the first time in years. Caterers who were not Amara but who required Amara's coordination of every logistical detail, the serving schedule, the kitchen access, the compound's particular systems and storage and the dozen invisible things that keep a large event from becoming an expensive embarrassment. Amara had organized it all. She had done it with her usual thoroughness, starting before the sun came up and working through the day with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who has managed this compound through every kind of occasion and knows its rhythms the way a musician knows their instrument. The guests arrived. The evening began. Everything was running exactly as it should. An hour into the dinner, Vanessa appeared in the kitchen. She was composed. She was always composed in public. But her eyes had the particular quality of a woman who has decided that now is the moment and has been waiting for it. She said there was a problem with the serving arrangement. That the wrong dishes had been brought out in the wrong order. That guests were commenting. That this was exactly the kind of oversight she had been worried about. That perhaps it was time to acknowledge that the management of a household of this level required, and here she paused, selecting the words with the precision of a woman who has been selecting them all evening, a different kind of attention than had been available to them. Amara looked at the kitchen. The serving arrangement was not wrong. She had confirmed it twice that afternoon. The dishes had gone out in the order specified in the schedule that Vanessa herself had approved. She said this quietly, without heat. Vanessa said she was not going to stand in the kitchen and debate this while her guests were waiting. She left. 5 minutes later, Emeka Johnson entered the kitchen. His jaw was set in the way it set when he had made a decision and did not want to be in the room where he was implementing it. He was followed by the compound's head of security, a man named Obi who had been at the compound for 8 years and who looked, in this moment, like a man who has been given an instruction he would prefer not to carry out. Emeka said, "Amara, I think it's best if you end your evening here." She looked at him. The kitchen was very quiet. The sound of the dinner party came through the walls, laughter, conversation, the particular music of 40 people enjoying themselves in an expensive space that she had made ready for them. She said, "What are you saying, sir?" He said, and he said it without meeting her eyes, which was the thing she would remember longest, "I think it's time for us to make a change. We'll discuss the details this week. But tonight, Obi will help you with whatever you need." Obi stood in the doorway of the kitchen looking at the floor. Amara stood still for a moment. She looked at Emeka Johnson, looked at him with the full, direct attention she had given everything in this compound for 20 years, and she did not speak. There was nothing to say that would change what had already been decided in a room she had not been in. She said, "I understand." She went to her room. She moved without hurrying. She folded the apron she had worn all day and placed it on the chair. She packed the things that were hers into the bag she had arrived with, which was, she noted, the same bag. 20 years and it was still the same bag because she had never accumulated more than she could carry. She had always, at some level, known this was wise. She looked around the room. She straightened the bed cover. She did not need to, she was leaving, not hosting, but she straightened it because it needed straightening and she was still the person who straightened things that needed it even on the way out the door. She picked up her phone from the nightstand. She looked at it for a moment. She placed it on the bedside table. Not because she forgot it. She did not forget things. She placed it there and she left it there, and she would know later, would have time to think about what she had known in that moment, that she had made the choice with a completeness that was not accident. She had left it. She had known she was leaving it. She had not known, and could not have known, what Bright would do when he found it. She carried her bag through the corridor. The sounds of the dinner party accompanied her down the hall. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped. Bright was there. He was standing at the foot of the stairs in the specific posture of a young man who has been watching a thing happen that he does not know how to stop. His face had the open, unguarded quality it had always had. He had never learned to close it the way his sister had, the way his father had. Everything he felt was visible and what he felt right now was visible and considerable. He said, "Amara." She looked at him. She set her bag down. She held him the way she had held him through fevers and nightmares and the particular darkness of adolescent grief, with both arms, fully, the way you hold someone when you want them to be able to feel that they are held. She said into his shoulder, "You are going to be fine. You have always been better than you think." He could not speak. She picked up her bag. She walked to the gate. Obi opened it for her. He said her name, just her name, nothing else. It was the most he could offer under the circumstances and she received it as what it was. She walked out. The gate closed behind her. He went to her room. He did not plan to. He found himself moving toward it the way grief sometimes moves people, without a fully formed intention, drawn by the need to be near the space someone occupied when the person is no longer occupying it. The room was exactly as she had left it. Neat. The bed cover straightened. The chair tucked under the small desk. The surface cleared of the personal items she had taken. Except for the phone. It was on the nightstand. A simple thing, not new, not the kind of phone that announces itself. He recognized it. He had seen it in her hand 1,000 times. He picked it up. He did not know why he expected it to be locked. She had never been the kind of person who locked things. Locking things was for people who had something to hide and she had spent 20 years demonstrating that she had nothing to hide. The screen opened on the camera roll. He scrolled back, not intently, not looking for anything. Just moving through the record of her days. The compound's garden in different seasons. A photograph of him and Lara that he hadn't known she had taken, the two of them at a table, laughing at something he could no longer remember. His father at his desk, seen from the corridor, not a posed photograph, just a captured moment, the image of a man working. And then a video. The thumbnail was the kitchen. The cream tiles. The table. A time stamp in the corner, late, deep night, the kind of hour that the kitchen was never occupied. He pressed play. The quality was not perfect. The phone had been set on the table, tilted slightly, and what the camera captured was the middle distance of the kitchen, the table's surface, the window behind it showing nothing but dark, and his father. His father as he had never seen him. Not the Emeka Johnson of board meetings and compound gates and the particular authority with which he occupied every room he entered. Not the man who wore his success like a second skin, who had never, in Bright's entire memory, shown anything to anyone that could be described as vulnerability. This was someone else. Or rather, this was the same person with everything removed except the person. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass in front of him and his jacket was off and his sleeves were rolled and he looked like a man who had been sitting in that chair for a long time and intended to sit in it for longer because moving required a direction and he did not currently have one. He was talking. The voice was low, not the voice his father projected in rooms but a quieter register, the voice of a man speaking to himself as much as to the woman sitting across from him. Bright could not see Amora. She was behind the phone. But he could hear her. Her voice came from that direction. Calm, present, without the particular attentiveness of someone performing care, but the real thing, the deeper thing, the kind of presence that does not need to announce itself because its quality is enough. He heard his father say, "I am sitting exactly where he sat today." He heard his father talk about the grandfather Bright had never met. About a table like this one. About a promise made over a table like this one, by a young man who had decided that he would build something so solid that nothing could put him in that posture. And then he was in that posture. Bright pressed pause. He sat on the edge of his mother's bed, his mother's room, which had been Amora's room, and he held the phone and he sat with what he had just heard for a long time. Then he pressed play again. He watched his father become honest. He watched it happen in real time, the dropping, one by one, of the protective layers that Emeka Johnson had spent a lifetime installing. The partners who had reassessed their loyalty. The contracts. The specific terror of a man who has confused motion with security and has just discovered they are not the same thing. He heard his father's voice do something it had never done in Bright's presence. It cracked. Not into weeping, his father did not weep, or had not, until this kitchen, until this night. But into the raw, undefended register of a man who has stopped maintaining his own surface. And then he heard Amora. He heard her push the notepad across the table. He heard the specific sound of it, paper on tile, that small domestic sound amplified by the kitchen's nighttime quiet. He heard her say, "Write them down, sir. Every reason. I am not leaving this kitchen until you do." And then the scratch of the pen. He heard his father write. He could not see what was being written, the camera was tilted wrong, but he heard it. The pen moving across the page. The pauses. The pen moving again. He heard his own name, not spoken but somehow present in that kitchen. He knew, with the certainty of a child who has always known where he stands in his father's heart even when his father could not say it, that his name was on that page. The video was 3 minutes and 47 seconds long. He watched it twice. Then he sat in the room that smelled faintly of the soap she had always used and he pressed his hands together and he stayed with what he had seen until he knew what he needed to do with it. He called his father. Not to the compound. He called his mobile, called it directly, bypassing the layers that usually mediated access to Emeka Johnson even from his own son. His father answered on the third ring. The dinner party had long since ended. It was very late. His voice had the texture of a man who has sent 40 guests home and is now alone with the compound silence and whatever the silence is saying to him. Bright said, "I need you to come to her room." A pause. Whose room? Amora's room. "Come now. Please." His father came. He stood in the doorway of the room that was still hers in every way that mattered. He looked at Bright sitting on the edge of the bed. He looked at the phone in Bright's hand. Bright held it out. He said, "She left this. I don't think it was an accident." Emeka Johnson took the phone. He pressed play. Bright watched his father watch himself. He watched his father's face move through the expressions of a man encountering the record of a self he thought he had kept private. Surprise first, then recognition, then something deeper and more complicated that settled as the video continued and did not lift. He watched his father's jaw tighten when he heard his own voice in that register, the undone register, the 3 a.m. register. He watched his father hear the notepad pushed across the table. He watched his father hear her voice say the thing she had said. "Write them down, sir. Every reason. I am not leaving this kitchen until you do." The video ended. Emeka Johnson stood in the doorway of Amora's room holding a phone and looking at nothing in particular. He was very still in the way that people are still when they are doing something violent and significant entirely on the inside. Bright said nothing. His father said nothing. The compound was quiet around them, the compound she had organized and maintained and moved through every day for 20 years, whose rhythm she knew better than anyone, whose needs she had anticipated and met before they became visible. Then Emeka Johnson's shoulders dropped. Not far. He was not a man who collapsed visibly. But they dropped the specific half-inch of a man whose body has decided to stop pretending. He said, "Where is she?" Bright said, "I know." The address Bright had was a flat in Surulere, a building that was not trying to be anything except what it was, which was solid and clean and modest and real. The kind of address that Lagos produces in its millions, where the majority of the city's actual life takes place outside of the compounds in Lekki. Emeka Johnson drove himself. No driver. He had not driven himself anywhere in years, and the unfamiliarity of it was, he would think later, appropriate. The city looked different from this angle. Not worse, just different. Realer. The kind of real that remains constant whether or not you are looking at it, which is the nature of real things. He found the building. He found the flat number Bright had given him. He stood at the door. He knocked. There was a silence on the other side of the door that told him she was there and was deciding. Then the door opened. She looked at him without surprise. Not because she had been expecting him exactly, but because she had been expecting something. She had left the phone with the certainty that there was something on it worth finding, and she had left it because she trusted the person she had left it for. She had not known what Bright would do with it. But she had trusted that Bright, being Bright, would do the right thing. He was his mother's child in that way. She had always known it. She looked at Emeka Johnson standing at the door of her flat in Surulere at an hour when the city had the particular quality of the deep evening, quieter, more honest, less defended, and she said, "Come in." He came in. The flat was small. Organized with the same economy she had always applied to the things that were hers, nothing unnecessary, nothing wasted, everything purposeful. A bookshelf. A small table. A plant on the windowsill that was healthy because she watered it correctly. He sat in the chair she indicated. She sat across from him. He held out the phone. She looked at it. She looked at him. He said, "I didn't know you had this." She said, "I know." He said, "Why did you record it?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Because I was afraid for you. That night. I was afraid of what you might do if the morning came and you had forgotten what was waiting on the other side of it. I wanted you to have the record of yourself surviving it. I was never going to use it. I was never going to show you." He said, "But you left it." She said, "I left it for Bright. Not for you." He sat with this. She said, "Bright needed to know that his father is human. He has been afraid of you for a long time, not because you are frightening, but because you are so completely defended. He has never seen behind the wall. I thought, if he found it, it might help him understand that the wall is not the whole of you." A long silence. He said, "I threw you out." She said, "Yes." He said, "After 20 years. In front of 40 people. Because my fiancé was uncomfortable." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am ashamed of myself." She looked at him. She looked at him with the full, direct, unguarded attention she had always given him in the kitchen at the hours when the household's performances were over and only the real things remained. She said, "Good. You should be." He flinched. She said, "I am not going to tell you it's fine. It is not fine. 20 years is not a small thing. What was done to me in that kitchen in front of the caterers and Obi and your children, that is not a small thing. And I will not reduce it to a small thing to make this conversation easier for you." He said, "I know." She said, "But I also know who you were that night in the kitchen. I know that is in you, the man who sat at that table and told the truth about himself. I know he exists because I was there. And it is because I know he exists that I opened this door tonight." He looked at her for a long time. He said, "I want you to come back." She said nothing immediately. He said, "Not as the help. I understand that is, I understand that needs to be different. I want," he stopped. He tried again. "I want you to be treated the way you should have been treated for 20 years. I want my children to be able to see you. I want." She said, "Mr. Johnson." He stopped. She said, "I am going to think about it. That is an honest answer. I am not going to give you a yes tonight because a yes tonight would be about your need and not about what is right for me. I am going to think about what is right for me. And you are going to wait for that answer. He said, yes. She said, and there is the other matter. He said, Vanessa. She said nothing. She did not need to. He said, I know. She said, I did not say anything about Vanessa. That is your decision. I am simply noting that there is the other matter. He stood. He stood and he looked around the small flat that she occupied with the particular dignity of someone who does not need a large space to be fully themselves. He looked at the books and the plant and the organized smallness of a life that had been built from her own resources without any of the compound's considerable advantages. He said, Can I ask you something? She said, yes. He said, the night in the kitchen. The notepad. I wrote the reasons down. I remember it, not clearly, but I remember it. I remember you making me write them. Did you? Were you afraid I was going to? She said, yes. A long silence. He said, thank you. She said, go home, sir. Call your son. He is waiting. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. He turned back. He said, Amora. What you did that night. What you have done for 20 years. What you are. He stopped. He did not have the words. Men like him rarely have them, and he had spent a lifetime not developing them because developing them requires an honesty about need that he had never permitted himself. She said, I know. Go home. He went. Lara called the next morning. She had heard. She always heard. She had her sources in the compound and she had been tracking the Vanessa situation with the careful attention of a woman who has been waiting for a specific outcome to arrive. When it arrived, she had felt the specific, exhausted satisfaction of having been right about something she had not wanted to be right about. She called Amora directly. She said, I should have said something sooner. Amora said, yes. Lara said, I am sorry. Amora said, I know you are. There was a pause. Lara said, will you come back? Amora said, I am thinking about it. Lara said, what would help you decide? Amora said, honesty. From your father. Real honesty, not the kind that is performed because it is required and then put back in the drawer. The sustained kind. The kind that changes what happens next. Lara said, I'll hold him to it. Amora said, I know you will. That is why I answered the phone. Vanessa left the compound 17 days later. There was no dramatic scene, or if there was, it was private in the way that the compound's most significant things had always been private. What was known was that the engagement was over and that the compound returned to the configuration it had held for 20 years, minus one person, plus the specific quality of honesty that had been introduced into its atmosphere by a phone and a video and a man driving himself through Lagos late at night for the first time in years. Bright went to see Amora the following Sunday. He came with no agenda except to sit across from her at a table and be in the same room as her the way he had always been, easily, without performance, in the particular comfort of a relationship that has never needed to explain itself. She made tea. He sat on what was now a kitchen stool in a kitchen that was smaller than the one he had grown up sitting in, but which had the same quality. The same quality that she created in whatever kitchen she occupied. He had always thought it was the room. He understood now that it was her. He said, I want to tell you something. She said, tell me. He said, I watched the video 3 times. She looked at him. He said, the part where you say you are not leaving that kitchen until he writes it down. I want you to know, I have thought about that my whole life without knowing that it existed. I have felt that in you my whole life. The quality of it. The thing that stays. She looked at him for a long time. She said, your mother had it too. Before she got sick. She had it in the way she looked at you. You carry it from her. I just kept it warm for a while. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, will you come back? She smiled at him. She said, I already have. She returned to the compound on a Tuesday. She returned not as the help, though she would still do the work she had always done, because she was a woman who did not stop doing a thing properly simply because her position within it had changed. She returned with a formal arrangement, a contract, salary, terms, the paperwork of someone whose contribution to a household has finally been acknowledged in the language the world understands. She returned to a compound in which Emeka Johnson had begun, slowly and imperfectly and with the specific difficulty of a man learning something he should have learned decades earlier, to be present. To be honest. To be the version of himself that had sat at a kitchen table at 3 in the morning and told the truth about himself to the only person who had stayed. She returned to Lara's calls, longer now, more real, the calls of a woman who has decided to be her own kind of honest. She returned to Bright, who needed none of these adjustments because Bright had always been himself, had always been present, had always been the open, unguarded, feeling person his family had not known what to do with. She went to the kitchen. She straightened the things that needed straightening. She put the kettle on. She stood at the window and looked at the back garden, the bougainvillea, the compound walls, the particular quality of morning light on a Tuesday, and she felt the specific, uncomplicated, hard-won feeling of a person who is exactly where they are supposed to be, doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing, fully known by the place they inhabit. She had given 20 years to this family. She would give more. Not because she had to. Because she had chosen to. And there is no smaller distance in the world than the distance between those two things. If Amora's story stayed with you, if you felt what it means to be the person who stays at 3 in the morning when everyone else is asleep, the person who holds the light for someone without ever being asked, then you are exactly who this channel is for. Subscribe to Acts of Hope with Zach. Ring that notification bell. And share this story with someone who needs to be reminded today that the people who hold our world together deserve to be seen. Drop a comment below. Tell me, who is your Amora? Who has been the person in your life who stayed when it would have been easier to leave? This is Acts of Hope with Zach, where every story reminds us what really matters. Until next time, God bless you all.